The true measure of Deborah Vivian Mitford, a woman of quiet yet profound strength, often lies hidden in moments far from the public gaze. One such revealing episode, an anecdote that beautifully captures her extraordinary down-to-earth nature, unfolded in the late 1960s. It was a pivotal time, shortly after destiny had called her and her husband to become the stewards of Chatsworth House, one of England's most breathtaking and historically significant ancestral estates. Within the hallowed, echoing halls of this sprawling manor, a testament to centuries of aristocratic life and legendary opulence dating back to the 16th century, the newly minted Duchess of Devonshire could easily have been envisioned reclining in regal splendor. Indeed, many would have expected her to delegate every concern, content to allow a retinue of capable staff to orchestrate the intricate daily ballet of managing such a grand domain. However, that was never Deborah's path. One particularly long evening, her mind still buzzing with the day's exhaustive efforts to conjure strategies that would keep the iconic, yet financially precarious, estate afloat, she slipped off her well-worn shoes. Padding softly down the immense silent corridors, her figure a solitary silhouette against the ancestral portraits, she sought out the housekeeper. There was no hint of aristocratic demand in her demeanor, no litany of complaints or imperious commands. Instead, with genuine concern etching her features, she humbly inquired how they might possibly balance the pressing need for new draperies against the stark, unavoidable truth that the ancient roof above them desperately cried out for repair. This display of modesty, this refreshingly hands-on engagement with the practicalities of her new role, was so unexpected that it took even her own family members aback, accustomed as they were to different expectations of ducal behavior. Here was a duchess entirely unafraid to immerse herself in the unglamorous, essential work, quite literally willing to get her hands dirty. This small, intimate glimpse into her character speaks volumes, offering significant insight into the truly remarkable woman, known to her inner circle of family and friends with simple affection as Debo. Before embarking on a deeper exploration of her intricate life story, with all its interwoven complexities and dramatic turns, it is essential to meticulously set the stage for the world she inhabited. Deborah Mitford, the youngest and perhaps most unexpectedly pragmatic of the famous and often controversial Mitford sisters, was born into the rarefied air of early 1920s British aristocracy. Her family name would, in time, become inextricably linked in the public consciousness with a bewildering array of startling political affiliations, uniquely vibrant personalities, and love affairs that ranged from the romantic to the scandalous. Britain itself, during these formative years of her life, stood on the precipice of tremendous, society-altering social, political, and cultural transformations, its collective psyche still bearing the deep scars and reeling from the profound aftermath of the First World War. Debo's parents, David Freeman Mitford, the second Baron Redesdale, and Sidney Bowles, were firmly entrenched figures within the nation's privileged upper class. Their offspring, particularly the 6 charismatic and headstrong daughters, were destined to capture and shape the public imagination in ways that spanned the entire spectrum, from the delightfully comedic to the deeply scandalous, and at times to the genuinely unsettling. Nancy, the eldest, a sharp wit, would carve out a successful career as a celebrated novelist, her works often dissecting the very class she was born into. Diana, with her striking beauty and controversial choices, married Sir Oswald Mosley, the charismatic but deeply divisive leader of the British fascists. Unity, driven by an intense and ultimately tragic idealism, controversially befriended Adolf Hitler in the turbulent 1930s. a connection that sent shockwaves of disbelief and horror through her family and, indeed, the wider world. Jessica, rebellious and fiercely independent, dramatically eloped to Spain and dedicated her life to passionately championing the cause of socialism. Pamela, often described as the quietest and most rustic of the sisters, managed to maintain a life relatively removed from the relentless glare of public scrutiny that followed her siblings. And then there was Deborah, the baby of this extraordinary and often tumultuous family, who, through a series of unforeseen events, would eventually step into a position of enormous, almost daunting prestige and far-reaching responsibility as the Duchess of Devonshire. On the surface, Deborah's childhood might conjure images of idyllic glamour, a life lived amidst sprawling, manicured estates, punctuated by elegant parties and the refined pursuits of her class. Yet, beneath this glittering veneer, the reality was a dynamic swirl of charming chaos, unexpected financial pressures, and sudden, unpredictable turns of fortune. She never received a formal, structured education in the conventional sense, a circumstance not entirely uncommon within aristocratic families of that period, who often prioritized social grooming over academic rigor for their daughters. The Mitford girls were primarily educated at home by a succession of governesses. Their knowledge gleaned more from the rich tapestry of books in their family libraries, lively dinner-table discussions, and the colorful stories recounted by their elders than from any formal curriculum. Their father, Lord Redesdale, affectionately known as Fav, was a man renowned for his pronounced eccentricities. Often perceived by outsiders as gruff, formidable, and somewhat intimidating, he was, by all accounts from those who knew him best, intensely and fiercely devoted to his family, albeit in his own uniquely unconventional way. The sisterly bond was a complex tapestry of fierce loyalty, frequent, spirited quarrels, and relentless, often elaborate, teasing. They famously invented their own private languages and intricate systems of nicknames, constructing a unique familial mythology that insiders found endlessly amusing and hilariously conspiratorial, while outsiders often found it utterly baffling and impenetrable. Deborah would later recall with a characteristic chuckle that their large, rambling country houses were so perpetually filled with an atmosphere of elaborate jokes, intricate pranks, and playful absurdity that she, as a child, could hardly distinguish moments of genuine seriousness from elaborate jests. This innate, warm, and resilient sense of humor would prove to be an invaluable, stabilizing anchor throughout her life, a quality of particular importance when the dark clouds of her family's political controversies threatened to overshadow every other aspect of their existence. As the 1930s drew to a close, these controversies escalated alarmingly. Unity Mitford's increasingly ardent and public fascination with Adolf Hitler became a source of profound concern and embarrassment as the ominous clouds of war gathered relentlessly over Europe. Diana's unwavering dedication to fascist ideologies similarly alarmed relatives, friends, and a significant portion of British society. The Mitford name, which once predominantly stood for a certain brand of witty, sophisticated aristocratic charm, was now becoming increasingly and disturbingly associated, at least in the public mind, with extremist politics and deeply toxic ideologies. Deborah, then still a young woman navigating her late teens, found herself uncomfortably caught in the bewildering cross-currents of this familial and political turmoil. The familiar rhythms of her daily life were profoundly disrupted as the stark realization dawned upon the family and the nation that Europe was teetering on the very brink of a devastating conflict. While several of her sisters were making international headlines, some for reasons that cast a dark shadow on the family name, Deborah instinctively sought to remain grounded. She was naturally shy, lacking the assertive outspokenness of Nancy or the fiery conviction of Jessica, and she firmly believed that a quieter, more observational route was her most prudent path forward amidst the surrounding storm. Yet, the considerable stir and lasting infamy created by her sister's notorious exploits would continue to cast long shadows, subtly and overtly influencing the trajectory of her life for years to come. A pivotal turning point in her personal journey arrived in the early 1940s, a time of global upheaval when she encountered Andrew Cavendish, the thoughtful and unassuming second son of the 10th Duke of Devonshire. Their initial meetings took place at the customary social gatherings of the upper class, but beneath the conventional surface, an undeniable spark ignited between them, a nascent sense that they might truly understand and complement one another. Deborah's mother, Sydney, a woman ever conscious of her daughter's futures, was especially eager to see them settled into suitable and stable marriages, though the looming shadow of war and the persistent whispers of scandal cast an unpredictable and often tense mood over all their social interactions. At that particular juncture, Andrew's older brother, William Cavendish, Marquess of Hartington, known affectionately as Billy, stood as the direct heir to the immense Devonshire dukedom. Billy, in a match that had captivated society, was also married to the vibrant Kathleen "Kick" Kennedy, the spirited sister of the man who would one day become US President John F. Kennedy. Debo would later wistfully recall an afternoon spent with Billy, Kick, and Andrew, the four of them wandering together through the awe-inspiring staterooms of Chatsworth. They marveled at the seemingly endless portrait-lined walls, each painting a silent testament to the centuries of history, power, and lineage encapsulated within that magnificent structure. Though Deborah was undoubtedly susceptible to the inherent romance and grandeur of these aristocratic trappings, she possessed a practical intelligence that prevented her from being naive about the profound responsibilities and inherent complexities of belonging to such an ancient and illustrious family. The fairy tale came with significant burdens. Tragically, the vibrant promise of that generation was cruelly cut short when Billy was killed in action in Belgium in 1944 during the final brutal stages of World War II, only a few short months after his marriage to Kick. The sudden, devastating heartbreak reverberated through both the Cavendish and Kennedy families, leaving an unfillable void. For Andrew, the shocking loss of his beloved older brother meant not only profound personal grief, but also the sudden, unexpected inheritance of a destiny and a weight of responsibility far heavier than he had ever been groomed or prepared to bear. With Billy gone, Andrew, once the spare, was now the heir apparent. Deborah, who had married Andrew in a relatively modest wartime ceremony in 1941, now faced the altogether new and rather daunting prospect of one day becoming the Duchess of Devonshire, mistress of one of Britain's most significant ducal estates. But that transformative moment, the formal assumption of their titles and the vast responsibilities that accompanied them, would not arrive for several more years, until 1950. It was then, upon the passing of Andrew's father, that they officially became the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire. This was a profound shift that instantly propelled the relatively young and unassuming couple into the intense glare of the national limelight. They were thrust into a demanding public role that required not only immense financial acumen and astute public relations skills, but also a remarkable capacity to adapt to the rapidly changing social and economic landscape of post-war Britain. Although the title of Duchess might evoke images of effortless fairy tale existence, Deborah quickly discovered that Chatsworth House, their magnificent inheritance, was besieged by a host of very real and formidable challenges. The estate was encumbered with staggering, almost crippling debts. Its infrastructure, from the plumbing to the roofing, was largely outdated and in dire need of modernization. Compounding these issues was a mountainous burden of death duties, the punishing inheritance taxes levied by the government that threatened the very survival of Chatsworth as a private home. Legend persists that in those early desperate days, she and Andrew seriously contemplated the heartbreaking possibility of selling off priceless masterpieces from the art collection, or even divesting significant parcels of ancestral land simply to make ends meet and secure the estate's immediate future. But Deborah, possessed of a quiet but steely determination, was resolved to find a more creative and sustainable solution, a way not merely to preserve Chatsworth's physical fabric, but to breathe vibrant new life into its ancient heart. With remarkable foresight, she recognized that the traditional age of the grand private estate, an era where such properties were sustained solely by agricultural rents and the accumulated wealth of old family money, was inexorably drawing to a close. A new era, one demanding greater public engagement and innovative financial models, was dawning. Deborah, ever pragmatic, decided that Chatsworth must adapt to survive and flourish in this new world. Her initial proposal, in the deeply traditional and often insular aristocratic context of the time, seemed almost shockingly radical. She put forth the idea of opening Chatsworth House and its magnificent gardens to paying visitors on a regular basis. Furthermore, with an entrepreneurial spirit that was then uncommon in her circles, she organized well-stocked gift shops and initiated the marketing of an array of souvenirs, postcards, and a diverse range of high-quality farm products derived directly from the estate, from delectable jams and preserves to artisanal cheeses. She even pioneered the concept of hosting large-scale public fairs and agricultural shows on the estate grounds, a strategic move that might seem commonplace and sensible today, but was nothing short of revolutionary for a ducal estate of that period. For a while, there were audible sneers and whispered criticisms from certain quarters within Britain's traditional upper circles. Some viewed her initiatives as an unseemly commercialization of the aristocracy, a lowering of standards, even a betrayal of their class. But Deborah, fortified by an unwavering vision and a practical understanding of the stakes, pushed resolutely through these criticisms. She was guided by a single paramount goal: to ensure that Chatsworth not only survived but thrived, and, crucially, to sustain the livelihoods of its many loyal employees and their families, who depended on the estate for their existence. Her bold and at times controversial strategy proved to be resoundingly successful. Over the ensuing years and decades, Chatsworth was transformed from a financially troubled private residence into a beacon of innovative estate management and a resounding commercial success. It began attracting hundreds of thousands of visitors annually from across the globe, offering a compelling blueprint for how other stately homes, facing similar existential threats, could not only survive but also flourish and remain relevant in the modern world. Yet, along this challenging journey of revitalization, there were profound personal heartbreaks that ran parallel to the public triumphs. For instance, it is not widely known that Deborah and Andrew endured the devastating, repeated loss of multiple children in infancy. This unimaginable grief was a private sorrow that Deborah very seldom spoke about publicly. her generation often maintaining a stoic reserve in the face of personal tragedy. However, insights from her private letters and the tender recollections of those who knew her intimately reveal the profound and lasting depth of this sorrow. The loss of her children weighed immensely and heavily upon her heart. Yet, with characteristic resilience, she also appeared to channel her deep emotional pain into an even fiercer determination to preserve her family's future and safeguard the enduring legacy of Chatsworth for generations yet to come. In her later, more reflective years, she would confide to close friends that the relentless, day-to-day tasks and responsibilities of managing the vast estate, the regular meetings with local tenant farmers, the personal attention she gave to the expansive gardens, the unwavering commitment to ensuring that every single visitor felt genuinely welcomed and valued, provided a crucial focus. These activities helped to keep her mind occupied and her spirit resolutely hopeful, even in the face of personal loss and the immense pressures of her role. One of the most charming and perhaps lesser discussed facets of Deborah's rich and varied life was her deeply felt, if somewhat endearingly whimsical, adoration of Elvis Presley. Yes, that is entirely correct. The impeccably poised Duchess of Devonshire was, in fact, an enormous and devoted Elvis fan. She genuinely loved his music, enthusiastically collected Elvis memorabilia, and was once described by a close friend as being practically starstruck by the king of rock and roll. Her pilgrimage to Graceland, the American singer's famed and flamboyant Memphis home, presents an image that hardly aligns with the often stuffy, rigidly conventional stereotype that many people might envision when picturing an English duchess. But then again, Deborah Mitford was never one to be constrained by typical expectations or societal molds. Her irrepressible sense of fun, her refreshing willingness to laugh heartily at herself, and her genuine capacity to relish the simple, unpretentious joys of life, these qualities endeared her to people from every conceivable walk of life, across the entire social spectrum. From the local farmhands who worked the Devonshire lands to the members of her extensive and often eccentric aristocratic circle, everyone who encountered her recognized that Deborah was utterly unique. She possessed an uncanny ability to seamlessly blend an innate regal poise and dignity with an approachable, disarming warmth that put everyone at ease. However, despite her personal efforts to carve out a distinct identity for Chatsworth, the long shadow of her family's wider controversies never entirely faded from public consciousness. Deborah's sisters, with their dramatic lives and often polarizing views, remained enduring sources of fascination and, frequently, fodder for the press. Nancy, with her sharp, satirical pen, continued to produce best-selling novels that often cleverly, and sometimes controversially, lampooned the attitudes and behaviors of the upper classes, occasionally drawing undisguised inspiration from her own unconventional family for comedic and critical material. Jessica's passionate ideological battles became so all-consuming that she eventually chose to emigrate to the United States, where she became a prominent and vocal champion for various left-wing causes and civil rights movements. Diana, who had been imprisoned during World War II due to her close ties to fascism, lived for decades under a persistent cloud of public suspicion and social ostracism, a figure of enduring controversy. And Unity's complicated and deeply troubling relationship with Adolf Hitler had ended in profound personal tragedy when she attempted to take her own life upon the outbreak of war, an act from which she never fully recovered. For Deborah, witnessing the divergent and often painful paths taken by each of her sisters was a heartbreakingly personal affair. She loved them all, each in her own quiet, steadfast way. But she could not, and did not, ignore the significant and often negative impact their decisions and public personas had on how the Mitford name was perceived by the world at large. Friends and confidants attested that Deborah harbored a genuine worry that all of her painstaking efforts and remarkable achievements, especially the monumental task of revitalizing Chatsworth, could be perpetually overshadowed or even entirely eclipsed by the more sensational and often scandalous angles that some newspapers relentlessly pursued when writing about the scandalous Mitford sisters. Despite these anxieties, she remained unswervingly determined in her mission. By the 1960s and 1970s, through sheer hard work, innovative thinking, and an intuitive understanding of public interest, Deborah had successfully transformed Chatsworth into a major, internationally recognized tourist destination, positioning herself as an early and influential pioneer of what would later be termed heritage tourism. She astutely introduced bustling farm shops, which championed and sold locally sourced produce and artisanal goods, thereby supporting the regional economy. She meticulously made sure that visitors who flocked to Chatsworth did not merely tour the magnificent grand hallways in hushed awe, but also felt a tangible connection to the estate's living, breathing countryside traditions and its ongoing agricultural life. And when her demanding schedule allowed a moment's respite from managing budgets, overseeing restorations, or graciously greeting distinguished guests, she could often be found nurturing her lifelong, profound love of nature. She famously took great pleasure in raising chickens, and it was not uncommon for her to be seen in the dew-kissed early morning hours, personally collecting fresh eggs. Imagine for a moment the slightly surreal yet utterly charming image. A duchess, casually attired in practical rubber boots, strolling contentedly among her chicken coops, carefully selecting fresh eggs for the morning's breakfast, while just a short distance away, within the opulent walls of the main house, rows of priceless masterpieces by Rembrandt and Van Dyck silently graced the ancestral collection. That vivid contrast encapsulated Deborah in a nutshell. A woman equally and genuinely at ease in the rarefied world of high art and international society, as she was in the earthy, unpretentious realm of rustic agriculture and simple country pleasures. One particularly poignant and historically significant event in Deborah's later life was the re-establishment of her contact with the Kennedy family. Following the tragic death of Kathleen "Kick" Kennedy Cavendish in a devastating plane crash in 1948, the initial warm closeness that had existed between the Devonshires and the Kennedys had, understandably, diminished somewhat over the intervening years. However, after John F. Kennedy's momentous election as President of the United States in 1960, these transatlantic connections began to re-emerge and strengthen in various meaningful ways. This renewal culminated in a deeply emotional and historically resonant moment in November 1963, when Deborah traveled to Washington, D.C. to attend President Kennedy's state funeral. She felt compelled to pay her respects, not merely as a formal representative of the esteemed Devonshire family, but more profoundly as someone who had personally known and cherished the Kennedys, particularly the vibrant and beloved Kick. Standing amidst the vast, somber crowd of international mourners, a witness to global grief, she recalled the bright, vivacious spirit of Kick and reflected on how life, with its unpredictable currents, had taken such a tragically irrevocable turn for them all. This solemn visit also served as a strange and poignant mirror, reflecting her own deeply personal experiences as an integral part of a prominent family that had been touched in almost equal measure by extraordinary fame, profound loss, and persistent controversy. At that solemn funeral, surrounded by the weight of history and palpable sorrow, Deborah was confronted anew by the universal and inescapable fragility of human life. It was a stark reminder that no matter how grand one's inherited title, how magnificent one's worldly possessions, or how powerful one's societal connections, tragedy possesses an impartial ability to come knocking at any door. But her life was far from being solely defined by sadness or solemnity. There were indeed countless lighter moments, times filled with genuine joy, infectious laughter, and warm camaraderie, where Deborah's quick, understated wit and her exceptional gift for generous hospitality truly shone. One seldom recounted but telling anecdote, often shared by former Chatsworth staff members with fond amusement, illustrates her character perfectly. It recounts an instance when a tourist, clearly and completely failing to recognize the Duchess amidst the bustling crowds, rather brusquely asked her for directions to the public restrooms. Without a moment's hesitation, without any hint of umbrage or self-importance, Deborah graciously showed the somewhat bewildered visitor the way. She even personally escorted them down a long, ornate hallway, ensuring they wouldn't get lost within the labyrinthine grandeur of the house. She never corrected their assumption, nor did she offer any clue as to her true identity. It was only some time later, perhaps after seeing a photograph or hearing a description, that the tourist belatedly realized they had been personally guided by the very esteemed lady of the house herself. Such stories, though seemingly small and anecdotal, speak volumes about the core of her character. Inherently unpretentious, genuinely service-minded, and possessed of a deep, unassuming kindness that transcended her station. Of course, no life lived so prominently in the public eye, particularly one connected to such a controversial family, can ever be entirely free from scrutiny or dissenting opinions. Although Deborah herself never embraced the extremist political ideologies that had attracted some of her sisters, her very family name, the Mitford connection, could, in certain circles and at certain times, be enough to stir unwarranted suspicions or dredge up past controversies. In the transformative post-war years, British society was undergoing rapid and profound changes. Long-established class structures were being rigorously questioned, and inherited titles, once symbols of unquestioned authority, were increasingly viewed with a complex mixture of residual awe and burgeoning resentment. Some influential commentators and social critics of the era argued that the aristocracy as an institution was fundamentally out of step with the values and realities of modern democratic society, and that grand, privately owned estates like Chatsworth represented an outdated, privileged social order that no longer had a justifiable place. Deborah's consistent and quietly dignified response to such critiques was always to point towards the tangible, positive contributions the estate made, the crucial employment it provided for the local community, the meticulous preservation of priceless art and irreplaceable architecture for the nation, and the vital sense of continuity it offered with Britain's rich and multifaceted history. She rarely, if ever, allowed herself to be drawn into heated political arguments, however. She possessed a steadfast belief that her actions and the visible success of Chatsworth would ultimately speak far more eloquently and persuasively for themselves. Historians and cultural commentators continue to debate and dissect various aspects of the Mitford sisters' collective and individual legacies. Some view them as emblematic figures, representing the inherent extremes and potential pitfalls of entrenched upper-class privilege, the so-called Mitford phenomenon. a bizarre and fascinating case study in how radical and often dangerous ideologies could take firm root within an eccentric, socially insulated and elite family unit. Others suggest, with considerable justification, that by focusing almost exclusively on the more sensational, scandalous, and politically troubling elements of their story, we risk overlooking the remarkable and diverse cultural contributions made by gifted figures such as the novelist Nancy and indeed the pragmatic innovator Deborah. In Deborah's specific case, a significant number of academics, historians, and social commentators now widely recognize her as a genuine trailblazer, a visionary in her own right. By courageously making the decision to open Chatsworth to the general public, and by actively and astutely managing it as a commercially viable business enterprise, she effectively turned the tide for countless other historical homes across Britain. Many of these magnificent properties, facing similar financial ruin in the post-war era, might otherwise have crumbled into irreversible decay and been lost forever. Clear echoes of her pioneering approach to estate management, her blend of heritage preservation with savvy commercial enterprise, can still be clearly discerned in the operational models of countless stately homes throughout the United Kingdom today, many of which owe their very survival to the kind of dynamic, forward-thinking strategies she so effectively championed decades ago. And the true significance of her long and impactful life runs far deeper than mere bricks and mortar, or even the preservation of priceless artifacts. Deborah Mitford stood at a unique and challenging intersection of monumental societal changes that reshaped the 20th century world. Born into the privileged yet fading twilight of the Edwardian era, and in the immediate, uncertain aftermath of World War I, she lived through the cataclysm of World War II, witnessed the subsequent rise of social democracy and the welfare state in Britain, experienced the gradual crumbling of old imperial structures, and navigated the complex and often uncomfortable modernization of Britain's aristocracy. She quietly, yet profoundly, embodied a vital bridge between cherished tradition and necessary progress, demonstrating how the two could, with vision and effort, coexist. For older audiences, particularly those who vividly remember the social and cultural landscapes of the mid-20th century, her life story serves as a living, breathing testament to how drastically and fundamentally the world has transformed. It also illuminates how individuals, even those born into positions of seemingly unassailable privilege and lofty titles, must inevitably adapt to changing times or risk being left behind by the relentless march of history. And for those individuals who may harbor a natural skepticism or even outright cynicism towards the concept of aristocracy, Deborah's life offers a compelling counter-narrative. An example of someone who effectively utilized her inherited position and considerable resources not merely for personal comfort or aggrandizement, but with a profound sense of duty to revitalize and safeguard a significant cultural treasure for the benefit of future generations. When Deborah and Andrew celebrated their remarkable half-century wedding anniversary, Chatsworth was no longer a quiet, financially precarious private home, but a vibrant, bustling hub of activity. The estate's once silent grounds were now regularly filled with the joyous sounds of seasonal festivals, the appreciative murmurs of visitors attending prestigious art exhibitions, and the diverse languages of tourists drawn from every conceivable corner of the globe. Deborah had the immense satisfaction of seeing her innovative ideas, once considered radical, come to spectacular fruition on a scale that must have seemed almost unimaginable back in the challenging, uncertain days of the 1950s, when the estate's financial future looked exceedingly grim. By the time she eventually stepped down from the intensive day-to-day management of Chatsworth, she had meticulously built a robust and sustainable framework, a successful model that her son, Peregrine, and his successors could confidently continue and build upon. She even found the time and inclination to share her unique experiences and insights with a wider audience by publishing several well-received books, including her charming and insightful memoir, Wait for Me. This book, along with others, offers captivating glimpses not only into her fascinating personal life and the unique world of the Mitfords, but also into the extraordinarily intricate balancing act consistently required to keep a place as historically significant and financially demanding as Chatsworth, both authentically preserved and economically sustainable in the modern age. As the inevitability of old age began to set in, Deborah faced it with the very same characteristic blend of down-to-earth practicality and unfailing good humor that she had brought to every other challenge and chapter of her long and eventful life. Even well into her 90s, she continued to speak with unabashed and affectionate fondness of Elvis Presley, would still giggle like a young girl over cherished old family jokes, and could vividly recollect with a mischievous twinkle in her eye the elaborate pranks and imaginative escapades she and her sisters had so gleefully concocted during their unconventional childhood. Those fortunate enough to visit her in her later years were consistently struck by her remarkably sharp memory, her enduring wit, and her charming ability to gently poke fun at her own undeniably aristocratic lifestyle and the sometimes anachronistic traditions that surrounded her. "I know it's all rather unusual," she might say, a playful smile dancing in her eyes as she gestured towards the centuries-old tapestries or the formal routines that still shaped her daily environment at Chatsworth. "But well, somebody has to dust the statues, don't they?" Friends and family recall that she never seemed entirely convinced of or particularly preoccupied with her own societal importance, despite her undeniably prestigious position as a duchess and the matriarch of a great estate. She simply and humbly perceived herself as a temporary caretaker, a steward who had been entrusted with the immense responsibility of looking after the magnificent heritage of Chatsworth for a specific period before faithfully passing it on to the next generation. That profound and genuine humbleness resonates deeply with many people, perhaps especially with older viewers today, who can still vividly remember an era when hereditary titles and aristocratic lineage carried an almost unquestionable and enormous social weight. Her legacy, inevitably, is a complicated one. How could it possibly be otherwise, given the whirlwind of controversy and the dramatically divergent paths that so often swirled around the infamous Mitford name? But perhaps the most enduring and universally relevant lesson to be gleaned from Deborah's remarkable life is the fundamental truth that personal choices, consistently made, truly do matter. While she possessed no power to alter her sister's often shocking actions or to silence the relentless swirl of sensational headlines that pursued them, she absolutely could and did shape her own distinct destiny and meticulously guide the future of the beloved estate she had come to cherish as her own. She made a conscious choice to work tirelessly, to embrace innovation even when it was met with resistance, and to bring an unwavering sense of practicality and genuine kindness to a world that was all too often associated with aloof pomp, rigid detachment, and resistance to change. Consider, for example, her steadfast and often unheralded championing of local artisans and regional businesses, an aspect of her work that is rarely discussed in mainstream historical accounts of her life. While many other aristocratic families, when faced with dwindling fortunes and changing times, instinctively turned inward, becoming more insular and protective of their remaining privileges, Deborah proactively and enthusiastically sought out collaborative partnerships with local craftsmen, neighboring farmers, and budding entrepreneurs. She was instrumental in developing innovative programs and dedicated retail spaces where Chatsworth would prominently showcase and sell regionally sourced produce and unique, locally made crafts, thereby providing a significant boost to the rural economy and fostering a sense of community pride. This forward-thinking approach, though it might appear modest in the grand scheme of ducal responsibilities, had a discernible and positive ripple effect. It helped to revive and sustain traditional crafts that might otherwise have vanished. It fostered a stronger sense of local identity and community pride, and it generated a considerable reservoir of goodwill that further solidified Chatsworth's growing reputation as a genuinely welcoming and community-oriented place. Decades later, numerous successful estate-run shops and farm-to-table initiatives across Britain continue to follow a vibrant model that she, in many ways, helped to pioneer. Of course, as with any innovative venture that challenges convention, not everyone was an immediate fan of these more commercial enterprises. There were critics, purists within the aristocracy and beyond, who accused her of selling out, of somehow cheapening the inherent dignity and historical gravitas of the venerable estate. Some traditionalists undoubtedly preferred the old exclusionary model, the imposing closed gates, the highly restricted private tours, an environment accessible only to a privileged select few. Yet Deborah, with quiet conviction, stood firm. She held a deep and abiding belief that opening Chatsworth's doors wide could do more than just secure its financial future. It could also inspire countless visitors, educate them about England's rich and layered history, and, most importantly, preserve something truly precious and irreplaceable for many generations yet to come. And history has unequivocally proven her right. Chatsworth not only survived, but thrived, becoming and remaining one of Britain's most popular, beloved, and financially successful stately homes, consistently drawing hundreds of thousands of enchanted visitors each and every year. It is frequently, and deservedly, cited by historians and heritage experts as a prime, exemplary case study of how the aristocracy, when guided by vision and pragmatism, can successfully reinvent itself and find a relevant, valued place within a rapidly shifting and increasingly democratic society. One particularly illuminating, though rarely discussed, tale from her challenging early days as the new Duchess involves the then radical and somewhat controversial idea of charging a formal admission fee for entry to Chatsworth. Back in that post-war period, a small handful of other stately homes had tentatively begun to dabble in offering limited public tours, but it was still generally considered slightly vulgar, even déclassé, for the nobility to be seen so blatantly charging ordinary people money to simply walk around their ancestral halls and gaze upon their private collections. Deborah, however, with her characteristic pragmatism and clear-sightedness, recognized that the revenue generated from such fees could very well be the essential lifeblood that would save Chatsworth from insidious decay and potential ruin. According to one well-documented account, she was personally determined to keep the admission price affordable, consciously ensuring that ordinary families, not just the wealthy elite, could experience the wonders of the estate. She even went so far as to informally poll members of the local community to gauge what they would consider a fair and reasonable price. thereby striking a careful and considered balance between ensuring accessibility for the many and generating the necessary income for Chatsworth's survival. That small, seemingly insignificant detail, a duchess, a figure of immense privilege, literally taking the time to research local ticket prices, perfectly and poignantly illustrates her refreshingly hands-on, thoughtfully community-oriented and deeply practical approach to her formidable responsibilities. As for the lingering controversies and the inevitable historical debates that continued to surround her family, the ominous spectre of her sister's deeply problematic far-right or passionately held far-left political involvements, especially during the tumultuous war years, never entirely vanished from the public consciousness or the media's interest. Even decades later, reporters would sometimes attempt to corner her at public events, hoping for a sensational soundbite, perhaps a revelation of long-held family secrets or a public denunciation of her more controversial siblings. Deborah's standard and consistently dignified response was to keep her comments graciously brief, polite, and non-committal. She steadfastly and wisely refused to feed the flames of sensationalism or engage in public recriminations. Some historians and commentators have argued, with varying degrees of conviction, that she perhaps should have taken a more overtly strong and public stance, especially in condemning Diana's and Unity's deeply troubling connections to Adolf Hitler and Nazism. Others, conversely, admire her unwavering loyalty to her family, even to its most errant members, and her steadfast commitment to forging her own separate, constructive path, rather than becoming embroiled in, or fueling, divisive public feuds. These complex debates continue to this day, revealing the painful and intricate complexities that arise when deeply personal familial bonds become inextricably intertwined with some of history's most profound horrors. But in the eyes of many observers, Deborah's principled refusal to publicly disown or excoriate her sisters, despite passionately and fundamentally disagreeing with their political ideologies, demonstrated a kind of profound moral nuance and deep personal integrity. She managed, it seems, to separate her enduring love for them as complex human beings, as her sisters, from the dangerous and damaging ideologies they had tragically chosen to support. Fast forward through the decades of her tireless work to her final, more reflective years. She eventually and gracefully retired from the active day-to-day management of Chatsworth, though she fittingly remained on the beloved estate, residing in a charming grace and favour cottage nestled within its familiar and comforting grounds. As her pace of life inevitably slowed, she often took quiet moments for contemplation, reflecting with a mixture of wonder and wry amusement on the many improbable, extraordinary, and often challenging twists and turns that her long life had taken. Born simply Deborah Mitford, often overshadowed in her youth by the dazzling flamboyance and sometimes shocking notoriety of her older, more overtly attention-grabbing siblings, she had ultimately succeeded in forging a remarkable and enduring legacy entirely distinct from them all, a legacy built on pragmatism, quiet dedication, and a profound love for a place. She once astutely remarked, with a hint of wistfulness, that she hardly recognized the highly stratified, intensely insular 1930s aristocratic world into which she had been born. That world, with its rigid codes and unquestioned privileges, had largely vanished before her very eyes, gradually replaced by a more dynamic, meritocratic, and complex modern society. A society in which inherited titles, she clearly understood, meant far less than genuine, tangible action and demonstrable contribution. Far from lamenting this profound societal evolution, Deborah seemed to genuinely embrace it. she expressed sincere gratitude that Chatsworth, under her careful stewardship, had successfully transitioned to become a vibrant, welcoming, and accessible space, cherished equally by ordinary families seeking a delightful day out, and by serious scholars and lovers of history from around the world. In the autumn of 2014, Deborah, the Dowager Duchess of Devonshire, passed away peacefully at the venerable age of 94. The outpouring of public tributes that immediately followed her death spoke volumes about the profound and lasting impact she had made. Former Chatsworth staff members, from groundskeepers to curators, recalled with genuine affection her innate warmth, her unpretentious kindness, and her quiet generosity. Visitors from all walks of life fondly remembered their personal, often brief but memorable, encounters with her on the estate. Historians and heritage experts, meanwhile, uniformly praised the remarkable practical ingenuity, visionary leadership, and unwavering dedication she had brought to the preservation and revitalization of one of Britain's greatest and most cherished ancestral houses. Her funeral, fittingly, was held in the serene and historic setting she had adored for so much of her life, Chatsworth's own St. Peter's Church. Among the diverse congregation that gathered to pay their final respects were local tenant farmers and long-time estate workers, standing alongside prominent public figures and dignitaries from across the globe. A poignant testament to the exceptionally wide-ranging and diverse array of lives she had touched during her long and fruitful existence. It was a quiet, deeply dignified farewell, a service that perfectly mirrored the understated grace and inherent integrity of the woman herself. Why then should people today, in a world so different from the one she was born into, still care about the life and legacy of Deborah Mitford, the last Mitford sister, the Duchess of Devonshire? In part, it is because her compelling story uniquely underscores and humanizes the broader, sweeping transformations of the 20th century, as seen through the intimate lens of a family that, for better or for worse, often found itself positioned directly at the turbulent heart of the historical storm. More importantly, perhaps, her life resonates on a deeply personal and relatable level. She faced and navigated immense, almost unimaginable personal tragedies. She endured relentless and often unfair public scrutiny, and she skillfully navigated the intense, often overwhelming complexities inherent in belonging to one of Britain's most famously controversial and endlessly fascinating families. Yet through it all, she consistently chose to channel her considerable privileges and available resources not towards self-indulgence, but towards creating something lasting, beautiful, and meaningful for the wider world. For older viewers, she remains a significant contemporary figure, a woman who masterfully managed to adapt and translate old-world traditions and responsibilities into the demanding realities of the modern era. For younger audiences, she stands as an inspiring and reassuring example of how one can profoundly honor and preserve the past without being inextricably chained or limited by its constraints. So, if anyone has ever found themselves wondering what genuine, effective nobility might actually look like in the context of the modern age, they might well find a compelling and deeply satisfying answer in the remarkable, quietly revolutionary story of Deborah, Duchess of Devonshire. She navigated a lifetime of potential controversy and familial complexities without ever resorting to public bitterness or unproductive hatred. She skillfully balanced the often heavy burdens of an ancient and storied family name with a consistently clear, forward-focused vision for the future. With courage and foresight, she opened her magnificent doors and graciously invited the entire world in, thereby thoughtfully bridging the often daunting gap between distant aristocratic tradition and everyday relatable human connection. And crucially, she accomplished all of this with an irresistible and uniquely endearing blend of genuine humility, sharp pragmatism, and infectious good humor. Qualities that continue to touch and inspire those who take the time to learn about her extraordinary life. Today, Chatsworth stands not merely as a magnificent static museum of a bygone aristocratic era, but as a vibrant, thriving, and dynamic testament to the enduring power of adaptation, vision, and hard work. That remarkable ongoing transformation is in itself a vital part of Deborah's enduring and invaluable gift to history. She, more than any other single individual, made it possible for countless visitors, ordinary families on a day out, curious international travelers, dedicated historians, passionate art lovers, to genuinely experience a living, breathing heritage, to feel the palpable pulse of history beating just beneath the undeniably spectacular surface grandeur. That, ultimately, is why her story remains so profoundly significant and continues to resonate. It serves as a powerful and timely reminder that how individuals choose to deal with their inheritance, be it a material legacy of property and possessions, or an emotional inheritance of family history and personal challenges, defines the future just as profoundly, if not more so, than any fleeting, headline-grabbing scandal or strident political stance. And in that fundamental sense, Deborah Mitford's life speaks with quiet eloquence to everyone, inviting each person to consider how they might make the most of what they have been given and to aspire, in their own way, to leave their small corner of the world in a slightly better shape than they found it. May her memory continue to remind people to open their own doors, whether literally or metaphorically, and to actively find ways to share their unique histories, their cherished hopes, and their individual passions with others. May her inspiring story encourage individuals everywhere to view life's inevitable challenges not as insurmountable obstacles that are destined to defeat them, but rather as precious opportunities for fostering creativity, forging meaningful connections, and achieving unexpected growth. And may the indomitable yet gentle spirit of Deborah Mitford, the pragmatic and beloved Duchess of Devonshire, continue to inspire new generations to look beyond superficial labels and ingrained preconceptions, and to strive to see the world and all its inhabitants with the same gentle wisdom, imaginative empathy, and steadfastly practical heart that she brought to everything she did. And that is all for this presentation. If you enjoyed this account, please give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comment section, and subscribe so you will not miss out on future updates. See you next time.